Hello everyone, my name is Alex Ray. I'm really happy to be presenting you my final project titled The Aztec Templo Mayor, a dichotomy of deities, religious sacraments, and sacrificial practices in the great city of Tenochtitlan. This presentation will start with an overview of the significance of Templo Mayor in the city of Tenochtitlan. We'll kind of talk a little bit about the architectural findings, the ruins of Templo Mayor discovered in modern day Mexico City, Mexico. Kind of talk about what we already know about what Templo Mayor was used for, specifically sacrificial practices, and how those were kind of seen as religious sacraments in a way. In addition, this presentation will also present counter-narratives to the paradigms in which we already operate in regarding this knowledge of Templo Mayor. Specifically, I will distill how these sacrificial practices could be seen as leaders in Tenochtitlan or governmental officers in Tenochtitlan exerting power and control over the individuals that resided there. But with that said, and without further ado, let's get started with an overview. All right, here we are on the first slide. Really, to explain a little bit about Templo Mayor, one has to understand that most of the central precinct of the city of Tenochtitlan was destroyed by European colonizers. But the ruins of arguably the most important structure of all, this Templo Mayor pictured here, remains somewhat intact, as we can see by the ruins on the left in modern-day Mexico City, Mexico. And really, this initial slide is meant to kind of give a first look at Templo Mayor and to give us a glimpse of what life could have been like through its ruins, as well as these kind of reconstructions of the temple, and how this presentation will show that the temple reflects many of the religious, spiritual, and cultural values of the great Aztec civilization. Again, on the left, we see the modern-day ruins of Templo Mayor within Mexico City, Mexico, and on the right, kind of reconstructions of what it may have looked like. Coming from that initial overview, I really wanted to talk a little bit about some of the findings. And I guess to start with those findings is that what is Templo Mayor and what purpose did it serve to the Aztec civilization? So Templo Mayor happened to be the only double pyramid in the ancient world, as we learn about in our class lecture. And it honors two different gods. As you can see in the picture, in the top right-hand or bottom right-hand corner, it honors Tlaloc on the left, the god of water, and Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and sun, on the right, as you can see in both of those photos on the right. With both gods coming together on the mountain of sustenance, Tonacatapel, and essentially being the creators of life and the objects within it. And really with this premise, Templo Mayor was of great importance to the city of Tenochtitlan because it was a primary way for the Aztec civilization to honor these gods through kind of the architectural aspects of it, as you can see here, but also in their practices, their religious practices, which often came in the form of human sacrifice. And finding this really interesting and hearing about kind of preliminary aspects of it in our lectures, I took the liberty for this final project to continue diving deeper into just what are the aspects of this human sacrifice practice, and what do scholars know about it? And that is really the focus of the next slide, to move on. So coming off that sort of overview and initial kind of findings pages, and hopefully having more of an understanding of the role Templo Mayor played in sacrificial practices, as well as just generally in the society of Tenochtitlan. But I wanted to take a moment to kind of look at some contemporary empirical examinations to build up into my theories of control that I mentioned. So, as we touched on briefly in the last slide, sacrificial practices for the gods in the Aztec civilization were extremely common, and they were kind of seen as a religious sacrament. And from what we have learned in our lectures and our book, these practices were extremely important, not only just to leaders within the Aztec civilization, but people who resided in Tenochtitlan generally. But after reading a study published by Ragsdale and colleagues in 2016 called Origins of the Skull Offerings of the Templo Mayor, Tenochtitlan, I became interested in kind of diving deeper into these complexities involved in these sacrificial practices, because from our courses and kind of from preliminary reading, we're just led to believe that it was common practice. But could there be something else going on under there? Could this be for a different reason besides just honoring the gods and it being a practice? Could it be that leaders wanted to incite some sort of fear to the public, to make them easier to control and sway a certain way, to scare political enemies, to scare some sort of military force? Who knows? It's really interesting to think about. And as we can see in our current landscape here in the United States, when you incite fear in a public, they are easier to control with rhetoric that does not follow any sort of logic. Anyways, reading this study and finding that it sought to examine human skeletal offerings at the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan that were eventually used as skull masks, as depicted here in these photos. Even though it is generally accepted that these individuals were obtained through warfare, which is another thing that I learned in this piece, and I found it really interesting that sacrifice individuals were obtained through warfare. The researchers wanted to identify even more about who these sacrifice individuals were and or where they came from. And they found that the individuals represented as skull masks, again depicted here, were likely different in social status and geographic origin from the unmodified offerings. I found this study super interesting, one, just methodologically because it's empirical and quantitative in nature. But I found it really interesting to see that there's a difference in social class and geographic region in these sacrifice individuals that were used as skull masks. And it makes me believe that my theory of there sort of being an exertion of power and control from folks who were involved at the time is a line of inquiry that we can continue down. Why were these sacrifice individuals different in social status if this was just common practice? Is this some sort of oppression from higher socioeconomic statuses of the time? Is this a social class thing or classism? It's very, very interesting. And another thing is that these individuals were obtained through warfare, as I touched on earlier. Why and how were they obtained through warfare? What did sacrificing them, specifically as I'll call them prisoners of war, what did that do for public perception of this kind of practice? And why was it like this for leaders? Why did they choose to sacrifice these individuals out of everyone? There's this sort of othering that I'm sensing here. As with these differences or disparities in social class or differences in geographic region, I'm sensing some sort of othering that was done through this medium of sacrificial practice, and not just having it be this religious sacrament, but it really being something else. And I really think this next slide, talking about theories of control, will really touch on that and will really push it forward and hopefully try to distill everything that I'm talking about. So we've made it to the theories of control slide. The fun stuff, as I say. The stuff where we really dive deep into what could be. And I find this to be a lot of fun and a really intellectually engaging and stimulating activity. Before I begin, I decided to put a couple of photos here on both the left and right of how gruesome these sacrifices could get and how painful it looks like it could have been. So as I talked about, and the themes of this presentation has touched on how control and power is present within Templo Mayor, and how Aztec leaders exerted this power through Templo Mayor. And after researching for this project, I realized that I wasn't alone in this at all, actually. A lot of other people were thinking about this. And specifically, Madeline Nicholson of the University of Connecticut, in her honors thesis titled Public Ritual Sacrifice as a Controlling Mechanism for the Aztec, focused on how Templo Mayor did serve as this kind of power exertion. And specifically, Madeline talks about and believes that the Templo Mayor's purpose in the Aztec civilization was to, quote, publicly display the power of the Aztec through, 1, the extravagance of their ritual performances, 2, the display of the loyalty of peripheral provinces through large goods accumulation, 3, the mass sacrifices, and 4, reminding citizens, both in the city and outside, what will happen if rebellion occurs. There's a lot to unpack here, and I think Madeline did an absolutely fantastic job of bringing the points that I wanted to talk about to life. And I really want to focus on specifically reminding citizens, both in the city and outside, what will happen if rebellion occurs. Looking at our last empirical article, the archaeological study, and finding that these researchers found that these skull masks were of people that were from different geographic areas and possibly different social classes, hits home this point of reminding citizens what will happen if rebellion occurs. And in also being that these individuals were obtained through warfare. So it's seeming like in this paradigm, when people try to oppose the what the Aztec leaders want to be the majority, they could be an aspect of sacrifice. Now, this makes me question everything that I have learned about Templo Mayor. So, kind of with that in mind, I want to move on to kind of concluding thoughts about this theory and this line of work. I really believe that this is a new line of research, or should be a new line of research, for scholars studying the Aztec civilization to take a closer look at how Templo Mayor and the sacrificial practices may be promoting power or some sort of exertion control. I think it would be really interesting to continue taking closer looks at this, and who knows, we might be able to uncover more about how this played out. They're only theories at this point because we don't have as much evidence as we'd like. Obviously, the empirical articles are great, but not enough to make this true plausible inference. However, I think this presentation is a great start and will kind of push research in this direction. I really do. So on that end, I really want to end off and talk a little bit about my references. We've made it to the end of the line. Here are my references, both for scholarly references for my presentation, and as well as the photos that I used, both from our textbook as well as museum websites and the greater internet. With that in mind, I really just wanted to say how much I enjoyed taking this course this semester. I mentioned briefly our current political landscape in the United States, and specifically, I think courses like this are in a particular worry or bad spot. Anti-intellectualism is attacking our universities, specifically the free expression that the arts and humanities offer. I think that taking this course within a current landscape like this is all the more important, especially as my presentation talks about exertion of political control and power. As I talked about a little bit in my initial introduction video, I'm going to be a PhD student in psychology at SUNY Albany starting this fall, or University at Albany, and I hope to continue pushing on those and fighting back against this. Anyways, it's somewhat unrelated to my presentation, but I feel the need to bring it up in any capacity that I know is safe to bring it up. Thank you so much again for listening to my presentation, and I really look forward to contributing and learning more in my free time about the Aztec civilization and just aspects of this course that we covered in general. Thank you so much again. I hope you liked the presentation. Thank you.